My husband died on a Thursday. By Friday, his children had already called a locksmith, and by the following Tuesday, I sat in a lawyer's office and listened to a man read my entire 40-year marriage out loud and reduce it to 2 words: domestic services. My name is Peggy Anne Morrison. I am 80 years old, and I am not someone who complains. I married Richard Morrison in 1964. I was 40. He was 55. I had been his secretary for 6 months when he asked me to dinner. Honest to God, I nearly fell out of my chair. Richard was impressive, wealthy, respected, the kind of man who walked into every room like he already owned it. When he proposed 6 months later, I said yes without a single hesitation. I thought I had found security and love all wrapped up in one package. Lord, I believed that with everything I had. Richard had 3 children from his first marriage: Stephen, Catherine, Michael, and they made their feelings crystal clear from the very first day. "You'll never be our mother," Catherine told me at the wedding reception. Sweet voice, cold eyes. Don't even try. But I tried anyway. For 40 years I tried. I remembered every birthday, every graduation, every small occasion that mattered. I cooked elaborate holiday meals, kept their childhood bedrooms exactly as they'd left them, bit my tongue through every cutting remark about my background, my community college education, my failure to give Richard more children. I managed that Brookline mansion like it was my life's work, because, honey, it was. I hosted his colleagues, entertained his clients, made every single person who walked through that door feel welcome and valued and seen. I was the perfect wife, the invisible woman behind a very visible man, and I genuinely believed, down to my bones, that we were building something real together, something solid, something built to last. The reading was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in March. I dressed carefully, simple red dress, white hair styled just the way Richard always preferred. I told myself there was nothing to be nervous about. 40 years of marriage. Surely he provided for me. Surely. The attorney began in that careful monotone lawyers use when delivering news they'd rather not share. Richard Morrison's estate, valued at approximately $8.7 million. I felt my whole body relax. $8.7 million. Everything was going to be fine. Then he kept reading. The primary residence, $2.1 million to the stepchildren. Investment accounts, $6 million to the stepchildren. Retirement accounts to the stepchildren. Everything. Every single thing gone. And then came my portion. The attorney's voice dropped, like even he couldn't bring himself to say it at full volume. My wife Peggy has lived comfortably at my expense for 40 years and has wanted for nothing. This is more than adequate compensation for her companionship and for the domestic services she has provided. Domestic services. I want you to understand something. Those 2 words didn't just hurt. They rewrote 40 years of my life in an instant. Across the table, Stephen was smiling. Catherine was examining her nails like she had somewhere better to be. Michael was already texting. And then Marcus, Richard's attorney, slid a brown envelope across that polished table toward me. His hands were trembling. I noticed that. Even through my shock, I noticed that this man, who had been to our dinner parties, who had laughed at Richard's jokes, who had complimented my cooking, could not look me in the eye. Inside the envelope was a rusty iron key, an address I had never once heard of, 47 Oakwood Lane, Milbrook, Massachusetts, and a note in Richard's handwriting. "Go there as soon as you can, Peggy. You will understand everything once you arrive. Trust me one last time, my darling. Trust me one last time." After everything that had just happened, after being erased in front of his children, after 40 years reduced to domestic services, he was asking me to trust him one last time. I picked up that envelope. I walked out of that office, and I drove 2 hours into the complete unknown. with a rusty key and absolutely nothing left to lose. What followed was something I would not wish on my worst enemy. Stephen, Catherine, and Michael came to that Brookline mansion nearly every day, bringing contractors, interior designers, real estate agents, walking through rooms with measuring tapes and color swatches while I was still living there, like I was already gone, like I was already invisible, which, I suppose, to them I always had been. One morning I was sitting at my own kitchen table drinking my coffee. Catherine walked through with a designer, didn't even glance in my direction. "We'll knock out this entire wall," she was saying. "Open concept, that's what sells right now." That wall had 40 years of my carefully framed family photographs on it, not that she noticed. A real estate agent stood 3 feet from my chair, discussing staging and property values with Stephen. "The gardens are significantly overgrown," the agent said, looking out my window at the beds I had planted with my own hands over 4 decades. "We'll need professional landscaping before we list." My gardens, overgrown obstacles to a profitable sale. Some nights the fear was so overwhelming I could not breathe. I was 80 years old, no job, no savings, no family. What on God's green earth was I going to do? And then the fear would turn into rage so fierce it surprised me. How dare Richard do this? How dare he let me spend 40 years believing we were partners, only to reveal in death that I had been nothing more than adequately compensated help? But rage takes energy, and at 80 years old I was running very low. On my final morning I walked through each room one last time. I expected devastation. Instead, I felt almost nothing. The only place that broke me was the garden. Standing among those roses I had planted that very first optimistic spring, knowing they would belong to strangers who would never know the woman who created them. Stephen arrived early. Of course he did. "The movers will be here at 2, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. And I looked at this man, this stepson I had cooked for and remembered and shown up for 40 years. And I said something I had been swallowing for a very long time. "Stephen, do you have any idea what it feels like to give someone 40 years of your life and be told it meant nothing?" His face went red. "Father left you a property," he said. "You're not getting nothing." "Your father left me a mystery," I said. "A house I have never seen in a town I have never heard of." I got in my car before he could respond. 2 hours and 14 minutes to a completely unknown future. Milbrook, Massachusetts turned out to be small and quiet in the way that old New England towns are. Not forgotten, just still. A main street, a general store, a diner with checkered curtains, a white church, a library that looked older than memory. As I drove slowly through, something strange happened. People stopped to watch my car pass, not with suspicion, with recognition, like they had been waiting. An elderly man outside the general store lifted his hand in a small wave. A woman at the diner nodded slowly, like she was confirming something to herself. My GPS directed me off Main Street onto Oakwood Lane. Pavement turned to dirt. Ancient oak trees lined both sides, their branches forming a tunnel of green shade above me. And then I looked up, and Lord! The house sat in a wide clearing, gray fieldstone walls, a slate roof remarkably intact, white wooden trim, leaded glass windows, ivy growing in careful patterns up the stone. Beautiful. Not a ruin, a secret. Before I could even step out of my car, a woman was walking toward me with purpose. "You're Peggy," she said. Not a question. "Yes. How did you know?" "Richard told us you'd come," she said simply. "I'm Dorothy Harmon. He visited here every month for 40 years, maintained this house, took care of the property, and he told us, when he died, his wife Peggy would inherit it. He said you wouldn't know beforehand, said he kept it secret to protect you. Protect me from what? From them, she said quietly. Come inside. There's something you need to see. Milbrook, Massachusetts turned out to be small and quiet in the way that old New England towns are. Not forgotten, just still. A main street, a general store, a diner with checkered curtains, a white church, a library that looked older than memory. As I drove slowly through, something strange happened. People stopped to watch my car pass, not with suspicion, with recognition, like they had been waiting. An elderly man outside the general store lifted his hand in a small wave. A woman at the diner nodded slowly, like she was confirming something to herself. My GPS directed me off Main Street onto Oakwood Lane. Pavement turned to dirt. Ancient oak trees lined both sides, their branches forming a tunnel of green shade above me. And then I looked up, and Lord. The house sat in a wide clearing, gray fieldstone walls, a slate roof remarkably intact, white wooden trim, leaded glass windows, ivy growing in careful patterns up the stone. Beautiful, not a ruin, a secret. Before I could even step out of my car, a woman was walking toward me with purpose. "You're Peggy," she said, not a question. "Yes, how did you know?" "Richard told us you'd come," she said simply. "I'm Dorothy Harmon. He visited here every month for 40 years, maintained this house, took care of the property, and he told us, when he died, his wife Peggy would inherit it. He said you wouldn't know beforehand, said he kept it secret to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From them," she said quietly. "Come inside. There's something you need to see." The interior stopped me cold. Wide plank floors glowing with decades of careful maintenance, a massive stone fireplace, beautiful furniture, built-in bookshelves lined floor to ceiling, and everywhere, covering every single wall, framed photographs of me on our wedding day, me in the garden kneeling in the soil, genuine joy on my face, me laughing, me reading, me sleeping on what I now recognized as this very porch. 40 years of unguarded moments, carefully captured, beautifully framed, displayed like a private museum. "He loved you very much," Dorothy said softly behind me. Anyone who came here knew that immediately. On the antique desk in the study sat a thick cream envelope. "My beloved Peggy," in Richard's handwriting. I broke the wax seal, and I read, "My dearest Peggy, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found the sanctuary. I am profoundly sorry it had to happen this way. Stephen, Catherine, and Michael were always watching, always waiting for any legal excuse to challenge my decisions. If they had known about this property, they would have found ways to take it. So I hid it. For 40 years I hid it and protected it and prepared it for you. I know what my will said. I know how much those words must have hurt you. I wrote it that way deliberately. I gave them the visible wealth, the Brookline mansion, mortgaged to the hilt, with preservation requirements built into the deed that will cost them hundreds of thousands. I gave them investment accounts locked in trusts with conditions they will find nearly impossible to satisfy. I gave them exactly enough rope. But you, my Peggy, I gave you everything that actually matters. This house sits on 247 acres of protected woodland. Value, approximately $3.2 million. The house itself, $800,000 as a historical structure. A trust fund covers all property expenses for the next 50 years. You will never fear losing this place. The deed has been in your name only since 1964, completely separate from our marriage, legally untouchable by anyone. And in the filing cabinets in this study, documentation I collected over 50 years of legal practice, information about powerful people, including my own children. Use it only if you must, but know it is there. I failed you by being weak when I should have been strong. I hope I have succeeded in death by being clever. You were the best part of my life, Peggy. The only pure, real, good thing in a life otherwise full of performance and obligation. This sanctuary is yours. Live in it, sell it, transform it, whatever you wish. But know it was built from love, protected by love, and given to you with more love than I ever managed to express while I was breathing. Forever and always yours, Richard. I read it 3 times. Tears streaming, and then I started laughing. I could not help it. After all the shock and grief and humiliation and terror, I sat in that beautiful secret study and laughed until my sides ached. Because Richard Morrison had spent 40 years quietly, legally, brilliantly protecting me, while his children thought they had won everything. They had actually inherited a mansion, hemorrhaging money and investment accounts they could barely touch. And I had inherited 247 acres of protected woodland, a beautiful stone sanctuary, 50 years of paid expenses, and the documentation to protect myself from anyone who came for it. Stephen, Catherine, and Michael showed up 3 weeks later. Expensive cars, expensive lawyers, smug expressions. I served them tea in beautiful china, let them sit in my living room surrounded by 40 years of photographs of me. When Stephen began talking about legal challenges and marital assets, I walked calmly to the study and returned with a thick folder labeled with their names. Your father spent 50 years as one of Boston's top attorneys, I said pleasantly, and he documented everything he learned about everyone, including his own children. Stephen's face went white. Catherine stopped breathing. Michael put his phone down for the first time since they'd arrived. So here is my offer, I said, and I want to be very clear. This is the only offer I will make. Walk away. Accept the will as written. Live your lives. Leave me alone in my sanctuary, or I release every single piece of documentation your father collected about you. Every last bit of it. The choice is yours. They left without another word. I never heard from them again. 6 months later, I sat on my restored stone porch, watching the autumn forest become a masterpiece of red and gold. The fountain was running again. The rose beds were blooming in organized rows. Dorothy stopped by every single day. The whole town of Milbrook had welcomed me like I had always belonged there. For the first time in 40 years, I had real friends, real community, real belonging that had absolutely nothing to do with being someone's wife. And I had a plan. I was going to transform this sanctuary into a retreat for women who, like me, had spent their lives supporting everyone else and needed a space to rediscover themselves, a place for widows, for women starting over, for anyone who needed shelter and time to find their next chapter. I was going to call it Morrison House, Richard's final gift, transformed into something that helped others. I was 80 years old. I had lost everything I thought I had, and I had found everything I never knew I needed. And I tell you what, honey, at 80 years old, I was just getting started. If Peggy's story reached something deep in you today, leave me a comment. Tell me, have you ever felt completely erased by someone you gave everything to? Or have you discovered that what looked like losing everything was actually the beginning of something better? I read every single one. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story, please share it with them. Because sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones carefully hidden from greedy eyes. And sometimes, at 80 years old, you are just getting started.